This is Dr. Casper, the political scientist, and I'd like to welcome you. Hi there, this is Dr. Casper, the political scientist, bringing you a discussion on sex and gender. Today I'll define what those are and define what are the challenges around this from my perspective. Really, it is a social constructivist understanding versus a natural law understanding of gender and sex. So join me for the next few minutes as I talk about this topic. All right, so let's begin. Sex. Sex is clinically really what your chromosomes tell us. Is it XX? Is it XY? XX, you're a female, XY, you're a male. You can look at the testosterone, you can look at estrogen, you can look at those levels, and they can tell you quite definitively whether a person is born a male or a female, right? So that's one of the key ways, and that's sex. Gender, on the other hand, is the reference to a type, right? Are you a man? Are you a woman? Right? And so that is really, when you think about sex, when you think about gender, that's really what it is. Male, female, man, woman. Okay, so what's the big deal about this? Well, the difference comes from, are you a social constructivist? Are you a natural law follower? The challenge, I think, when it comes to this argument has been that there are actually two different frameworks to see this topic. And while people are arguing against each other, they are actually not arguing from the same framework. So I'm going to talk about those frameworks in a little bit, okay? These frameworks create two different worldviews. See, worldviews, if you break them down to the lowest level or one of the lowest levels, I'll argue it's an axiom. An axiom, think of it as like an atom, all right? Atoms that build up the parts of a being or matter. And so when you think of axioms, axioms build up into ideas, ideas build up into principles, principles build up into laws and institutions. And so when we think about the laws and the policies that are about to come out on sex and gender, we have to start at the axiom level, okay? And so when we start at the axiom level, the social constructivists would argue that a lot of the things that we see in human society have been constructed or created by man, right? And therefore, if they've been created by man, they can be undone or recreated in whatever way a person so chooses. When we come to the natural law argument, natural law would argue that there are certain things that are actually established in the order of created nature. These things cannot be redone or undone, or if one was to choose to add to them, one has to prove the value addition. Otherwise, what you're actually doing is increasing chaos, okay? So let me start with the idea of sex and gender from the social constructivist understanding. The social constructivist would argue that actually gender is within one spectrum. In that spectrum, you have from female to male. And a person, this irrespective of their sex, can feel or consciously choose to be in any gender category. In fact, there's so many gender categories, there's even one that is a non-gender category itself. And so that is the social constructivist understanding of sex and gender, okay? And even in some quarters, they would like to redefine the idea of sex. They would argue that your gender was actually assigned by your doctor, that it is the doctor who socially constructs from their understanding of science and that this is a man because they're born a male. So they would argue that these are given at birth, and they're given by doctors or society in which the doctors live. On the other hand, natural law would argue that gender is not something that is constructed by humans, but is given by the creator of humans, that's God. In their understanding that God created man and woman. He created them, a man, a male, a woman, a female. And this was given by him. And therefore, in their understanding, it's outside or before human society that man and woman, the terms, actually exist. So you can first see the two different world views in play. These are two different frameworks on how to see things. Now let me talk a little bit about the natural law perspective. In the natural law perspective, you actually have two spectrums. In this spectrum, masculinity belongs to the male or the man. All of them are within their own spectrum, so that even if a man is artistic, they love music, they love art, they're still masculine, they're still a man. Whether they are G.I. Joe and they want to go and they're jocks and sports teams, they're still masculine and still a man. And the same thing for female. Women or females have their own spectrum, whether they are artistic or whether they are special forces, right? That is the natural law perspective. And the argument of natural law is this, is that natural law is knowable and understandable. In other words, nobody needs to teach you natural law. It's intrinsic within you as far as you being a created being. That the Creator has created you with certain inalienable rights and inalienable understandings. And therefore, you don't need to be told you're a man. You naturally know you're a man. You don't need to be or a male, okay? And so that is the argument of natural law. On the other hand, when it comes to constructivists, they have only one spectrum, all right? And so in this sense, sometimes I like to say it's like when people say, oh, that man, that's their feminine side, or that girl, she's a tomboy, right? So it's this idea of, are you a boy, are you a girl? And so this is where you go to even some school, psychologists, counselors, sometimes even professors, who you'll say, hey, I'm thinking this way about this sex and gender, I'm thinking that way about sex and gender, and they will tell you, hey, you may be in, they start talking in one spectrum, right? They say, maybe you're a woman, maybe you're a man, maybe you're trans, and all those things. That idea, the framework that those psychologists and clinicians and counselors are using is actually a social constructivist understanding. When it comes to natural law, it's very different. Natural law, they'll tell you, you actually belong in one of these two categories, and you may feel this way or that way, but overall, the order has been pre-established. So it's more of an issue rather than a need to change the meaning of this or to mix up the two spectrums. Okay? Now, let me take a small caveat or a small shift. Of another argument that has played into all of this, that is the inner intersex people. Yes, there is a percentage of people who clinically it's hard to definitively say what their chromosomes actually tell us, or their levels of estrogen and testosterone are quite high at the same time. There have been arguments, even in the United Nations and in other things, based on this idea that it's quite common and that there is a 1.7%. It was based on some book written by somebody called Anne somebody. And so people started saying, yeah, it's 1%. The likelihood of being intersex is as common as people with green eyes or all these other things. But in reality, when we clinically and empirically look at the percentage of people who are intersex, it's actually 0.018%. So yes, there's 0.01% of humans who we cannot definitively determine their sex. And therefore, it can be quite challenging to determine their gender. and this is clinically at birth. But I'm not particularly talking about intersex people. I'm more focused today on the 99.9% of human beings who are definitively born clearly male or female at birth, and they're usually assigned based on their sex, a gender of male or female. And now this new argument of later in life being able to shift and choose a different gender. The other big thing here is the question of meaning. When it comes to natural law, it's about being having a restriction to have meaning. On the constructivist side, is meaning can evolve based on personal choice. And so in this sense, I can say I subconsciously feel like a woman, therefore I am a woman. When it comes to the natural law, it's about empirical thinking. Can you empirically prove this? And number two, if you change terms, do you have the logical backing to be able to change those terms, right? And so in this sense, natural law, people in natural law would argue if there's no restriction on the meaning of the word woman, then that meaning will cease to exist. In other words, if anybody can jump in and say, I feel like a woman, therefore I'm a woman, therefore what is actually woman? So for them, they want to restrict. Woman is in these categories: your chromosomes, estrogen levels, amongst your reproductive biology. These are things that definitively restrict the category of woman. And by those restrictions, you can have women's rights, you can protect females, you can protect all these categories. On the other hand, the natural law would argue if you allow for terms to just be changed, therefore, what is the purpose of women's rights, Title IX, and all these other things that are created in society to protect women, if men can also jump into that category? Constructivists will argue this is a restriction on liberty and freedoms, and we should have the freedom to choose as we wish. So if I say that this is no longer a book to me, it's now a chair, it's my chair, and therefore I'm going to be sitting on it, and nobody should think of it in any other way, that's an extreme constructivist, right? But you might say, well, Casper, maybe that's an extreme example. Well, currently in certain schools, certain students can come with protection and demand that their teachers reference them as maybe a horse or a cat or whatever that student feels that they are. And if a teacher does not reference them in that way, that teacher may be fired. So this is not a simple discussion. It's a very important societal discussion, because the most important thing beyond social preference is legal consequence. Does the Constitution provide the right for administrative law, whether it's the Department of Education or schools or colleges, to demand that teachers, professors, or their workers follow new terminologies that are not based on what has been established? For example, rechanging the meaning of gender, rechanging the meaning of pronouns, or even going beyond human existence to now having a demand placed on the teachers and professors and workers to reference to people as not even human, to be non-humans, like horses or animals. Is this actually legally protected, or is this a violation of the teachers, right? So are there actually legal protections? That's where we are. Is there a legal protection or legal recourse for women who or females to go and say males or human beings born male don't have the right to participate in women's sports? That is a discussion currently going on in the courts. Is it equity? Now, constructivists will say maybe yes. yes, it's actually empowering for women, for men or males who choose to be women, to participate in women's sports, to qualify for women's scholarships, that this is actually progress. Well, when it comes to natural law experts, they will say this is actually regress, that you're actually thinking you're increasing your freedoms and liberties, but you're actually suppressing those you claim to be protecting. And so it's really one of the biggest questions here is, what is actually true? What is truth and what is meaning? Can you have meaning without restrictions and boundaries on words? Can you just change things without showing the value addition? And the reason why it's changing is because of those two worldviews. One worldview claims that gender is a social construction that has occurred in human society, and that humans have come up with man and woman. Definitively, natural law, on the other hand, says no, this is something that has pre-existed human organized societies, that this is indeed natural law created by God. And therefore, they would argue, if you look at the vast majority of nature, if you wrote a book and said that from now on, let's remove gender from lions. So if I came and told you a lioness is now a lion, or male lion, would you consider me still to be a good teacher? If I were to change the definition of animals or change the definition of plants from those which are female and those which are male. All right, and so those are the questions. Does it make sense, therefore, to change terms and terminologies? So, and lastly, who in a society has the right to change these things? Is it administrative law? Is it the majority? In this case, in our congresses in different states? Is it allowed at the federal level? Does the Constitution say anything about this? And so these are the many very important implications when it comes to this question of sex and gender. I'm not talking against having empathy and love for all people based on what they're going through in life. This topic is important, sensitive, and it's being faced by many families. It has definitely torn families. And so within this discussion, I think it's a discussion we need to have. It's a discussion we need to really reflect on, because it does affect many people and it will continue to affect many of us. This has been a few moments with Dr. Casper as I've looked at this very important, necessary discussion on sex and gender. Until I cover the next important topic, hang with me, subscribe, and follow. Bye-bye. Hi there, this is Dr. Casper, the political scientist, and I'd like to welcome you